Good evening and welcome to the Washington Week Extra. I'm Yamiche Alcindor. We're continuing our conversation on the January 6th investigation. This week, CNN reported on some text messages sent by Senator Mike Lee of Utah and Representative Chip Roy of Texas, both Republicans, to then White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. They show the two lawmakers went from fierce advocates of former President Trump to disheartened bystanders. For example, CNN reports that on November 7th, Roy wrote to Meadows saying, quote, "We need ammo. We need fraud examples. We need it this weekend." But by January 3rd, Senator Lee was texting Meadows that the effort to overturn the 2020 election could, quote, badly backfire. Joining me tonight to discuss this and more, Peter Baker, Chief White House Correspondent for the New York Times. Eugene Daniels, White House Correspondent and co-author of Political Playbook, and Mariana Sotomayor, congressional correspondent, or congressional reporter, rather, for the Washington Post. Thank you so much for being here. Mariana, I want to start with you. What's the significance, you think, of these newly revealed text messages? You're in Congress covering these lawmakers. I wonder what you make of them.
Yeah, a couple of different things. One way to look at it is just how much the committee knows, right? This could be just the tip of the iceberg of many text messages and many interviews that they've had with many different people who have been involved and know what their actions were leading up to January 6th, they being, of course, the administration, and what they were telling them to do and the aftermath. So that's one part of it that I'm sure will come out in the next couple of months as the committee continues to investigate. The other, of course, is just what these Republicans were thinking. These are two very pro-Trump members of Congress who have since been staunchly supporting the MAGA movement, especially since I cover more of the House. Chip Roy, he is very much in Trump's corner. And to see them say, or at least themselves reach a point where even though they, of course, were saying we need to find evidence, we need, as members of Congress, the evidence to be able to overturn the election, you saw them start to pull back the more that the administration, I should say Trump's own lawyers, were making these big claims of the election lie, that, Trump won by a landslide and we're going to prove that. And these members starting to actually warn the administration and say, I don't know if this is going the direction that we thought it was. I don't think that there is that enough evidence. And even Roy saying that you are putting a stake in the heart of democracy. You don't hear them talking about the election lie, the big lie, in that way, even when you ask them about it nowadays. They still try and skirt the issue. So to pull back and get a sense of what Republicans, including those very Trump allied members, are saying is very interesting.
Well, Mariana, sticking with you, I wonder, because as you just described, the lie continues. Republicans, a number of Republicans running in primaries in the midterms, they all really don't want to say that President Biden was elected fairly, even though there is no evidence of widespread election fraud in the 2020 election. How much of a difference does this kind of reporting make? Do voters take this information and sort of think about it in a way that changes or impacts their political decisions?
It's interesting now that the election season is really ramping up. You ask Democratic strategists this, you ask Republican strategists this, and they say it really doesn't. Republicans are very much of the opinion that, sure, this stuff can come out. And we should expect that this committee is going to have hearings at some point and a final report, probably right up against the November election date. And they say that's not swaying people that much. Democrats know that too. And for them, it's more, you almost note this saddened tone because they wish that voters cared a lot more about democracy. They talk about it in a more, we are the ones who are preserving democracy. We want to defend democracy. But that isn't necessarily resonating with voters right now because what they are feeling are all of these economic issues. That's forefront on their mind. And that's what Republicans definitely want to pin Democrats on. So not necessarily this specific issue.
And Eugene, I saw you nodding. Jump in here. What's your reporting sort of tell you about what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, talking about like the midterm effect or the effect that this conversation about January 6th has on the midterms, she's exactly right. You talk to Democrats, and they are concerned that this isn't breaking through. They thought this was going to be a much more important issue for voters as they move, especially as we got closer to the midterms. However, I will say there's frustration among Democratic strategists at times that the White House isn't talking about this more. They want to see President Biden out there yelling about this as much as he possibly can. He's done speeches about this. I want to be clear here. When you look at these images that we're seeing now, voters aren't seeing this all the time, right? They are thinking about gas prices. They are thinking about putting food on their tables. They're thinking about a pandemic that we're starting to see numbers tick up a little bit in certain areas again. And so it is incumbent upon Democrats, if they want voters to care, to talk about this a lot more. And they haven't been doing that because they also know that it's not resonating. But it's kind of like the chicken or the egg. Is it not resonating because they're not talking about it all the time, or is it not resonating because voters haven't seen anything? And I will say, when you talk about the committee kind of ramping up or having their public hearings, which we're going to see, they say in the next couple of months, that is one place that Democrats feel like they're going to have the upper hand, because for about a year and a half, we've seen Republicans kind of be able to whitewash and talk about January 6th in a way that at times, especially at times, is not true. It was not just a walk in the park. It was not that. It was dangerous. People died. And so Democrats feel like they're going to be able to tell that story with this committee and are hoping that will help them break through finally on this.
And Peter, we saw a number of Trump advisors come in and testify before the committee. His daughter, Ivanka Trump, her husband, Jared Kushner, as well as this week we saw Stephen Miller, who was a White House senior advisor, go in and speak to the committee. We don't know exactly what these officials are saying, but I wonder, what do you think of the significance that we're seeing people come in and speak for 8 hours to lawmakers?
Yeah, well, one of the things that's significant about it is that they're coming in, right? They're not defying the committee as others have. They're not like Mark Meadows, who has refused to talk to the committee, or Steve Bannon or Dan Scavino, or some of these real, people who are very loyal to President Trump. This is his own son-in-law and daughter. This is one of his closest ideological aides, and Stephen Miller, and they have chosen to go ahead and speak to the committee rather than to, take a chance on a contempt of Congress citation and a criminal charge by the Justice Department. What does that mean in terms of information for the committee? It's unclear. What do these three people in particular know? Obviously, you assume Ivanka and Jared, being members of the family, have quite a lot to say. Stephen Miller, one of the true loyalists all the way through the end, wrote a lot of the president's words in the most key moments. What does he know? We'd like to have that information. That could be key. But it may be a while till we actually have that information. But I'm most struck by the fact that they chose to do it and they didn't fight it, unlike the others. I wonder whether that's sending a message to other potential witnesses that it's time to drop any resistance and come in if there's no price to be paid by President Trump, or former President Trump.
And Mariana, Peter was just said the word time, and of course, time is what lawmakers are running out of. Talk a little bit about the pressure the January 6th investigation, the committee is feeling as the calendar keeps moving toward what could be possibly be Democrats losing control, and then, of course, losing this committee.
Yeah, Chairman Benny Thompson has always said there's no timeline for this to end. We all know that there is. Just like you said, it is the November elections. Right now, Republicans very much looking like they're going to take the majority. And Kevin McCarthy, if he's speaker, he's already saying, as minority leader, that he will disband this committee. So they very much are running up against time. They have outlined and tried to say that they may start hearings as soon as next month. That's likely to go into the summer, but they really have at least another month or two to continue investigating behind the scenes. They do want to be able to present in a storytelling kind of way what they have been able to find in these hearings. How long that takes, we're not exactly sure. It could be several hearings in a row in a week, or it could span several weeks. But that is also at a time when members of Congress are on the campaign trail. They don't want to be talking about January 6th or getting questions about Trump necessarily, both Republicans and Democrats. But either way, right now, the committee very much aiming to release a final report, likely in the fall, sometime in September or October.
Well, Mariana, sticking with you, you kind of wrote the intro to my next question to you because you told our producers that Democrats are sort of not wanting to talk that much about January 6th and Trump, but also wanting to make an appeal that really moves their voters to the polls. How are they balancing that?
Yeah, it's interesting because it really depends on the districts. And because I look more at House races, there are some Democrats that if it's likely they're facing off a super MAGA, very Trump candidate on the Republican side, they actually see a little bit of an advantage to talk about the democracy angle, to talk about January 6th and how Democrats have been the ones who have taken this seriously, this investigation seriously. But most Democrats, of course, don't want to be talking about Trump necessarily. They've learned the lesson from the Virginia gubernatorial race where that seemed to be the big issue. And you can't just run a race attacking Trump or attacking Trump-like Republicans. So they are likely just going to stick to talking about, again, those economic issues. If the issue does come up, which at times it does, those Democrats already trying to find a way to talk about how they, as a party, are trying to, make things more affordable. They're not necessarily leaning in on the democracy angle too much, but of course acknowledge the fact that this happened and that they are the party that is going to try and preserve the principles of this country.
Yeah. And Eugene, another subject that is related to January 6th, we saw an Ohio man who claimed that he was following presidential orders be found guilty. He said to the judge that he was sort of listening to President Trump and felt obligated to go into the Capitol on January 6th because President Trump told him to do so. What do you make of the fact that this defense that is being used by other defendants, at least in their FBI interviews, did not work for this man? I would say this man, his name was Dustin Thompson.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we've heard ever since January 6th happened, right? When you would talk to some of these folks that breached the Capitol, is they would say, in his speech, President Trump said we were going, right? He did tell them that they should go to the Capitol and that he would be going with them, right? And as we all remember, that didn't happen. And it seemed like it was never going to happen. He was not going to walk to the Capitol from the White House with them. And so this entire time, you've been hearing some of these folks say that they felt like it was an order, as Thompson said, from President Trump. That did not hold up in court because what was said by a government lawyer, right, by the prosecution, was that President Trump wasn't on trial here. That if that is to happen, that is a separate court, and that is not what's happening on this day. Because what you don't want, or prosecutors don't want, is people to be able to not get in trouble, not have some kind of legal ramifications for their own actions that day. Whether or not former President Trump has to answer for what he did that day is another story. Stephen Miller himself was asked, based on reporting by the New York Times, what the president meant when he talked about use the word we. Was he talking about all of us? What did he want we to do? And so that's something that the January 6th committee is looking into, and that you're also seeing play out in some of these court cases.
And Peter, last 30 seconds goes to you. President Trump just told the Washington Post that he wished he had gone to the Capitol, but that the Secret Service told him he couldn't do so. What do you make of the fact that this case this case resulted in someone being found guilty, even as the former president is saying that he wished he had joined in?
Yeah, it's remarkable, of course, how much he has come to embrace January 6th as an act of patriotism rather than an act of insurrection, right? He is trying to recast it in history as an expression of political protest of a stolen election, not the storming of a Capitol in order to stop the constitutional counting of the vote. And for a lot of Americans, that will resonate. But it is a remarkable, attempt to redefine, rewrite, and reshape history. That flies in the face of the video, which is still out there. You can find it on Google anytime, of what really happened that day. He was never going to walk to the Capitol. He was never going to do that. It was never a possibility. I don't know that he can walk that far. When we covered him, Yamiche, we never saw him walk very far. It's not something he does, much less the security idea of that. So when he was telling those people that, why was he telling them that? Because it was never going to happen. He was telling them that because he wanted them to go do it. He wanted to rev them up. Does that give him responsibility for what happened? That's a debate people will have throughout history.
we'll have to keep talking about this. Thank you so much. We'll have to leave it there tonight. Thank you to Peter, Eugene, and Mariana for joining us and for sharing your reporting. And thank you for joining us at home and for watching. I'm Michelle Sendor. Good night from Washington.